Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. How is it going? It is so great to be here today. Greetings from the sunny Costa Brava in Catalonia, Spain, where I am I am on vacation right now, but I am more than happy to take a break from my vacation in order to come here and be with you guys all and to share this information with you. So I'm gonna start sharing my slides. Do, 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 do. All right, here we are. Okay, so what we are going to talk about today is what is the value of a top fancy snooty patootie name brand MBA? So what we're going to talk about is what is even a top a name brand MBA? What do I even mean by that? When is a top MBA worth it? And when is it not worth it? You know, it might not necessarily be, even though it can be the best choice for a lot of people, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the best choice for you. And so I'm going to go through a few scenarios to try to cut through some of the hype and the hand wringing, because there can be a lot of, I think, ultimately very damaging emotional baggage that comes with things like MBA rankings. And so I want to try to cut through some of that. And then at the end, we will have a Q&A if there is time. I normally don't have time for Q&As because I normally talk way too much, but in this case, since I'm on vacation, I don't I might run out of slides. And so if there's time at the end, I would love to take your questions. Okay, so hey there. In case you don't know who I am, hi, I'm Maria Wickvila. I'm a 2005 graduate of Harvard Business School, and I have been helping people get into amazing MBA programs ever since 2003, which is when I enrolled and started volunteering with the admissions office there. And I am the founder of ApplicantLab.com, which is a DIY self-service tool to help you craft your strongest application possible. I am trying to level the playing field in a sea of very expensive admissions consultants. Applicant Lab is an affordable alternative. So I don't know if you've started looking into what admissions consultants charge, but they charge quite a bit. In fact, admissions consultants of my caliber, given that I am now in my 19th year doing this and I'm a graduate of Harvard, blah, 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 you know, realistically, I could probably be charging $500 an hour or so. But I don't do that. Instead, I decided to put my expertise into an online platform called ApplicantLab.com. It is all the same steps that an admissions consultant would walk you through. It's all the same work they would walk you through. And I was doing a previous session here, and someone commented that, wow, Applicant Lab, it looks a little overwhelming. It looks like, whoa, there's a lot to do. And my answer to that is, and I'm not trying to be flippant, but my answer is that applying to business school is in fact a lot of work. And so if you don't want to do a lot of extra work, then maybe you shouldn't apply to business school. And in that case, you can turn off this video right now. You don't have to keep watching. But even if you hire an expensive admissions consultant, they will also make you do these same steps. And in fact, many of them, some of the priciest ones have in fact started launching their own video library. So in case you're like, well, I don't know if getting my admissions advice from a video platform, an online platform with videos, I don't know if that's going to be good enough. Well, some of the most expensive firms out there have started doing it too. So I like to think that I've proven that the model works. Here's a new analogy that I've started using recently. So Applicant Lab is kind of like the Peloton of admissions consulting, although you're not going to sweat quite as much. So here on the left-hand side, we've got my girl, Robin Arzon. She is a star, super famous personal trainer. She can charge $500 per session. And if you want to book Robin Arzon to speak at your corporate event, her fees start at $75,000. Personally, I can't afford Robin Arzon, but you know what? I can sign up for the Peloton app, and for only $12.99 a month, I get unlimited access to Robin Arzon, an entire library of her classes anytime I want at a teeny fraction of the price. That's kind of what Applicant Lab is. If you want access to me, 24/7 for a teeny fraction of the price of traditional admissions consulting, Applicant Lab is for you. So when you think about what apps have done in general for us, they get you access to experts who otherwise wouldn't have availability, right? If I were doing this in a traditional model, like many of my friends who do traditional admissions consulting, I would probably be fully booked by now, at least for round one, or the schedule wouldn't work out. So I live in Los Angeles usually, and so, but my time, 2 a.m. your time is 6 p.m. my time, and blah. Applicant Lab, you don't have to worry about that. And so it gives you access to guidance that you wouldn't otherwise be able to afford. Now, to be clear, because this is a misconception that I've started to realize a lot of people have, signing up for Applicant Lab doesn't mean that you're alone. It's not just you and the software in a vacuum floating through a cold, uncaring universe. Like, there is a support emails are included in your subscription. There's a support inbox that either I or my colleague Karin, who is a Booth alumna / former McKinsey consultant, so either she or I will answer questions that are sent to the support inbox if you've got quick questions as you go through the lab. If you want something that's more than a quick question, you can also hire us for an additional fee to review your resume, your essays, do mock interviews, etc. So just to be clear, like, even though most of the work is done through the lab, and even though most users end up finding that if they just follow the steps, it's good enough, it's not like, if you email support at Applicant Lab, no one will ever get back to you ever. Although right now we're like in the middle of vacation, but still, we will get back to you. Okay, so let's talk about what is a top MBA or a name brand MBA. So I think this depends on who you are and what your goals are. So first of all, where do you want to live? If you want to live in the US or Canada or the UK or the EU, or even if you want to stay in your home country, home sweet home, that is going to impact what is a top MBA for you. If you live within the US and you know that you want to live in a certain geography in the US, that could also impact what is seen as being a top MBA. And also, if you want a more global career, one interesting thing to recognize is that oftentimes the parent university for an MBA program, that branding actually carries more weight than the MBA program ranking. So I remember I used to live in Hong Kong, and one of my colleagues, a delightful woman, had attended Yale for her MBA program. Now, those of us who, like, once you start digging into the, if you look into these toxic rankings, which I really don't think you should, but if you do, because it's human nature, you might notice that Yale is not like a top 3 MBA program, right? But Yale as a university has worldwide recognition as being a top university. Same thing with Oxford and Cambridge, right? Same thing with their other examples. And so if you want a global career, sometimes a top brand name MBA doesn't necessarily have to be the highest ranked MBA per se. Also, if you want to work in a very specialized field, your top MBA might be different. So one example I give a lot is if people want to work in Hollywood, in the entertainment industry, an MBA from, say, USC or UCLA will probably go further for you than a quote unquote higher ranked MBA from a program that is nowhere near Los Angeles or another entertainment hub. But in general, though, those sort of caveats out of the way, in general, when we talk about the brand name MBAs, we're talking about these rankings, either the US News rankings, the Financial Times rankings, or if you are looking at a particular geography, there are sort of famous schools within each geography, like IMD in Switzerland, CEIBS in Shanghai, and what have you. So let's start to think about what are some of the benefits of a top MBA. Now, in some cases, this could vary pretty dramatically based on what your interests are. So if we look at the big companies, like those big brand name firms that are, all these MBA graduates want to go work for, the top MBA programs could give you an advantage, but not necessarily like this amazing, super over the top advantage. I mean, so let's look at here. We've got 3 lists of some top employers from some MBA programs. So it might be a little small on your screen, but I'll try to highlight them with some circles or ovals. So here, McKinsey and Company, #1 employer. McKinsey and Company, #1 employer. McKinsey, #1 employer. Amazon.com, 3rd highest employer, 2nd highest employer, 2nd highest employer. Boston Consulting Group, 2nd highest employer, 4th highest employer, 3rd highest employer. Right, so the point is McKinsey, Amazon, BCG, these tend to be firms that people want to go work for the most. And so when you look at the different rankings of schools, you might think like, oh man, if I go to a school ranked #1 versus a school ranked #5, there's going to be a huge dramatic difference in those outcomes. And not necessarily. These lists this is Booth, which in the US News ranking is currently #1, NYU, which is currently #12, and Ross, which is currently #10. So the reason I put this up here is because I think sometimes people tend to think that, let's say a certain school is, let's say Stanford with a roughly 5 to 6% acceptance rate. It's like, let's say it's 4 times harder to get into than another school that's also in the top 10 or 15. Well, guess what? Like, it doesn't lead to 4 times better career outcomes, right? A lot of these top firms do recruit from the top schools. I mean, really what it will come down to more than anything is, especially for the management consulting jobs and for the product manager jobs, is once you get that interview, then the school you go to doesn't really matter per se. And then once you get that job, the school you went to doesn't matter as much as your performance on the job. To be, now to be transparent, some of the divisions of these companies might be different. So perhaps, let's say, I don't know, Amazon at one school might be recruiting more for its corporate M&A practice or its strategy group, and Amazon at a school that specializes in something like supply chain might be hiring more supply chain experts from, say, a school like Tepper. But in that case, I think it is partially because of the school's eliteness, but I also think it's because different schools attract students with different backgrounds, right? Your pre-MBA background will play a role for the most part in what opportunities are available to you after the MBA. And since Tepper tends to attract a lot of, supply chain experts, then it makes sense that those hiring groups would differ accordingly. But the point is, if you want to get a very sort of typical top MBA post-graduation job, you don't necessarily have to go to the tippity toppity schools. Now, the rankings or the sort of elite schools, it can be better if you are interested in certain niches. So this is a partial list right here. I only did partial so that you could hopefully at least read it on some level. So the companies here in red, this is from Sloan, MIT Sloan. Some of the companies here in red have hired 3 or more students for either full-time or summer positions in the past year or two. And some of the ones that I circled that are particularly interesting, obviously Google is here, and um, I'm sure McKinsey. Yep, McKinsey's here too. So obviously those guys are here. Amazon is obviously here, but I cut it off because otherwise you couldn't read it. But so DraftKings, like, wow, DraftKings, you might be like, well, that's weird. But when you think about DraftKings is kind of like a sports betting app kind of a thing. When you think about the fact that Sloan is essentially synonymous with tech, and since Sloan actually, unbeknownst to a lot of people, has an amazing sports a sports career section. They do an annual sports conference that is probably the best of all the MBA schools, I think, for sports. DraftKings makes a lot of sense. They're sending people to HEB Grocery, which is a huge grocery chain. HelloFresh, which is also that, one of those food delivery logistics things. So if you're interested in like last mile delivery, solving those sorts of problems, hey, that Sloan might be a great school for you to go to. And also Rivian. So as you can see, some of these, once you dig into some of these other employers, you can start to see little trends emerging in terms of certain schools specializing and sending people to, you know, tech startups or startups that tend to use lots of AI and analytics in what they do. Here's another example in terms of niche recruiting. So this is from the Columbia Business School Retail Luxury Group. If you want to work in retail luxury, you want to work for Louis Vuitton or Hermès or Cartier, um, you know what? Like Columbia Business School, you might get into another school that might be quote unquote ranked higher. But that New York location, man, you can't beat it, right? Columbia is probably going to be your best bet in terms of actually getting a job because you're there in New York and they are in New York, you're in New York. And it makes it that much easier for you to make those connections. And one thing I wanna bring up, and I say this a lot, sort of flippantly, um, is that even if you get into one of the best schools ever, like, it's Harvard, it's not Hogwarts. Up here at the top, I wrote CSC is not equal to magic. CSC stands for the Career Services. The different schools have different names. It's a career services center, right? Or the career people that try to help you get a job. They're good, and in some schools they're very good, but they're not wizards, right? They're not magical. So let's say right now you are a professional ballerina, but you have done some incredible leadership stuff elsewhere in your life, and you get into a great business school. You can possibly get a job at McKinsey, or maybe like a Goldman Sachs after business school, as long as you get that interview and you crush it in the interview, you're probably in good shape. But there is probably not a single career services uh, anywhere who could probably get you a job in something at a place like Blackstone, right? In private equity, because private equity is one of those fields in particular that really does look at your pre MBA employment much more than other fields. So some fields like at the sort of associate level investment banking or the associate level management consulting, they're just looking for people who can do the work and will do it with a smile and will do it for 80 hours a week. But they judge your ability to do the work based on how you perform during the interview. Other fields, however, judge your ability to do the work based on previous work that you've done. And so you probably, it's kind of hard to get a job in at any private equity shop, at least a big fancy one, without previous experience in investment banking. Now, our ballerina here, she could go work in investment banking for a couple of years and then try to get a job at Blackstone. But to make that jump directly, I don't even know if, I don't know, Dumbledore himself could pull off such magic. So let's also look at something like the starting salary, right? I think there's also this idea that, oh, well, I have to go, you know, Maria, I need to make money. And so, it has to be Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, or not, it's not worth it. I'm just not going to apply if I don't go to one of those three schools. And there is some truth to that. But so let's look here, sort of this is from a year ago, sort of the average salaries at some of the schools. So Stanford here is at the top with 152,000 a year. And then it sort of goes down from there. And then here at the bottom of this particular list is Cornell Johnson. So you might say like, wow, that's a $20,000 a year difference. Yeah, but when you're talking about numbers like this, that's a 16% difference. So again, it is, and I'm not saying this to like diss Cornell or UVA or any of these other schools that may be a bit further down on this list, but it is infinitely easier to get into Cornell. Like, I'm just being very honest. It's infinitely easier to get into Cornell or Fuqua or Darden or any of these. I'm not saying it's easy, to be clear. You still need to be super accomplished and super leadershipy. I'm just saying it's easier. Like the the bar to get into Stanford is like sky high. It's high for everyone else, but it's just like stratospherically high for Stanford. And yet, so then you would think like, well, since it's such a higher bar, like maybe they make 2 or 3 or 10 times as much money. It's a 16% difference coming right out. And then once you get that job, as I alluded to before, honestly, once you get that job, nobody cares where you went to school, right? So let's say our ballerina goes to work for Goldman Sachs right after business school. No one at that point, within a month, people are just going to mostly care about how good is she doing? Like, is she really great at creating these spreadsheets and doing these analyses? People are not going to be constantly asking her, like, so did you go to Stern? Did you go to Stern? Did you go to Stern? Like, who cares? Those people they're too busy working and getting stuff done. Nobody's going to stop and be like, wait a minute, you went to this school and not that school? That's really weird. That's really surprising. So now other people might say like, okay, Maria, fine. That's sort of entry level, the post graduation salaries. There's not like there's a difference, but not like a huge difference. Fine. But for the longer term though, Maria, if we're talking about like longer term wealth creation, that's where these sort of tippy top MBA programs make a big difference. And this is where I would argue that we kind of have a weird chicken and egg type of problem. Like, yes, these sort of longer term financially successful or professionally successful alumni, however you want to define success, it doesn't have to be financial. It could be in terms of ascending to a position of power or a position of repute, of positive repute. But the most successful alumni, sometimes, yeah, they do tend to go to sort of the more tippy top schools. However, to be clear, the school does not make them that way. Again, it's not Hogwarts. They don't give them a magic wand and suddenly I can do spells. It's not like that. What happens is that those elite schools, they let in people who are already on a path to be highly successful people. And so the way how you get into one of these top business schools is by being someone who, frankly, probably doesn't even need the MBA, if we're being honest, to achieve that sort of professional success. And so really what happens is that by letting in students who are already very successful young professionals, they are banking on the fact that these people are going to continue to be highly successful throughout the rest of their career. And then what happens is that since those schools graduate these more successful alumni, the more successful alumni attract the more successful young professionals who apply. And so it becomes this kind of very positive chicken and egg. But I will tell you, I have met people who were incredibly high performing individuals who, for whatever reason, maybe went to a school that was ranked, say, 16th instead of 4th. It doesn't matter. If you're a hustler and you're smart and you've got amazing leadership and people skills, it's not going to make a difference, right? One of the wealthiest people I happen to know off the top of my head. We were applying to business school at the same time. I got into Harvard. He went to UCLA Anderson. He could buy and sell me with his eyes closed. Like he is so rich. He killed it coming out of Anderson, and not coming into Anderson. He was sort of successful, but from a not very common background. But he went to Anderson and he hustled and he kicked all kinds of butt, and now he's like an angel. He's like on his 5th startup and he's had a zillion exits. And so I want to be clear, the school doesn't make the person makes the school. So let's be honest that correlation is not the same thing as causality. Now, the good news is, though, because the better schools do tend to let in more highly successful people, one of the big benefits of going to one of these schools is who your peers are going to be, who your classmates are going to be. Because today's classmates are going to be tomorrow's alumni network. So that's the good news, right? If you get into a top program, realize that this means that you are going to be surrounded by people who are at the same level of accomplishment and hustle and drive and resourcefulness and all those other positive attributes that you are. And so in the long term, those people become your alumni network. That's the good news. The bad news is, though, when we start talking about admissions and when we think about our admissions chances, then the higher the bar is for me to get in as an applicant. So, yay, I'll be surrounded by all these super accomplished people, but that means that I need to be super accomplished in order to be seen as being competitive enough to get into that program. And I think here's a quote, it's a paraphrase of something that Dee Leopold, the former admissions head at Harvard, said. And she was a little bit on the harsher side. I get the sense that Chad Losi, who's been on the job now for a couple of years, he's a little bit like kinder and gentler. But Dee once said something to the effect of, if getting into HBS would be the most impressive thing or the most interesting thing about you, then you're probably not competitive enough to get in. And I kind of love that quote. I know it's pretty harsh. Like on the one hand, I don't like it because it's harsh, but on the other hand, I like it because it's honest, right? If getting into Harvard Business School is like by far the most impressive thing, the most incredible thing about you, you might still get in, but it just may not be as common or as likely. And so yes, going back to this image, financially successful alumni are mostly the people you meet while you're there, but also that broader alumni network can at least try to help you get jobs later on. If you think the alumni network is going to be of particular interest or particularly useful for you, do your homework and reach out to alums from different programs and even just get a sense, like say you reach out to 5 different alums from different programs that you're interested in, just to see who gets back to you, who's nicer about it, who's kind of like dismissive. I'm obviously not meaning like, the Sheryl Sandberg. Like I mean like alums who are mere mortals. For example, one of the reasons why Tuck at Dartmouth is a program that I think a lot of people should consider is that, it's a smaller program. It might not have the sort of glorious cachet and name brand of other schools like a Wharton or a Booth. But the fact is that Tuckies are tight knit. They bleed green, and if there's someone in the Tuck network that you want to get in touch with, they will call you back. I cannot say the same as an HBS alumni, right? Like trust me, if I reach out to Sheryl Sandberg, I'm like, hi, you went to Harvard Business School and I went to Harvard Business School. Let's be friends. Like she would not even reply. One of her many assistants would they would either delete my email or they would print out my email and then burn it and then put those ashes in the trash, right? So just something to think about, that some of the fancier schools might actually have less. Uh, they might have more impressive alumni, but those alumni might not necessarily like help you at all. And something that you need to think about is I think that a big benefit of applying to business school is that it really forces you into a, a position of self-awareness where you really start to evaluate not only what is it that I want out of life, when am I at my best, what are some things I need to get better at, et cetera, et cetera. But also, I think you need to ask yourself, like, are you going to be happier at a school where you're surrounded by people who are, I put smarter in quotes because I think it's debatable. I think the intelligence of people all in the top 10, top 15 programs is probably, there might be some variations here or there, but if you look at like the average GMAT scores for some of these schools, they tend to hover around 720, 710, give or take 10 points. So we're talking like what, like 96th percentile versus 92nd percentile or something like that. I mean, we're not talking like 95th percentile versus 25th percentile, right? So in terms of raw intellectual horsepower, you're going to be looking at pretty similar folks. But I will say that I do think that the people at the more elite schools do tend to be a little bit more ambitious or a little bit more. I don't know if I want to use the word aggressive, but I put the word aggressive here. Folks who have really gone out of their way to make stuff happen. And I think you need to ask yourself, it's one thing to say like, yes, Maria, those are the people I want to be around, but is it really? Like, maybe it's not. Maybe those are people that you wouldn't really get a lot of energy being around. Maybe those people would be a little off-putting for you. Um, so it can be a benefit. It depends on who you are, right? Having super aggressive, super ambitious, super smart classmates for some people sounds like super energizing and exciting, but for some people it might be like, oh, I kind of want to go to business school to like learn and like make friends and stuff. And that's the culture. The culture does matter, and it does differ from school to school. But if you want the high flyers, then of course that's where the separation comes within between getting into like the Harvard, Stanfords versus the other schools that have similar GMAT scores, et cetera, but who may have like different levels of rigor in terms of getting in. It comes down to the sort of accomplishments and the things that they've done beforehand. A partial benefit of going to a top school can be the professors. I can say firsthand that not all of the professors at the top business schools are amazing. I had some professors at Harvard Business School that were kooky and weird and terrible. I had some professors that were flat out terrible. I had other professors that were great, but I had some professors that were just like really bad, really bad. I'm like, I can't believe I'm paying. I can't believe I'm going into like so much debt to listen to this fool talk. But I will say that a lot of the top schools are able to attract the better professors overall. Sometimes they define the better professor based on their publishing and their research. And so I think sometimes when you end up with a situation like this, it's because it's a professor that might be really, really on the cutting edge of research, but does not know how to explain anything to another human being. But for the most part, the better business schools are able to attract the better talent, right? Not only because, a lot of people would rather teach at a more elite school, right? Just like you as a student would rather attend a more elite school, professors would rather attend a more or teach at a more elite school. But also the more elite schools, frankly, can pay better. I have a good friend who is currently a professor at a business school that is part of a public university, and they are a rock star, and they are currently being courted by a private university's MBA program. And even though they love where they are, they're like, man, I can't ignore the money. Like, they can afford to pay me a lot more, and they can afford to hire TAs for me so that I don't have to grade anything. And my life is going to be so much better. So that having been said, it is true that some of the better programs can hire better professors or can attract some of the more exciting professors. So here in the middle, we've got Anita Elberse, who was one of my marketing professors. She is being held in the air by Katie Holmes on the left, the actress, aka the former Mrs. Tom Cruise, Piqué, the soccer players in the middle, and these are other athletes, football players, and I think a rugby player as well. And so, for example, Anita has written cases on Formula One, Pharrell Williams, BTS, Blumhouse Productions, which is sort of a horror films. I think they made like Get Out, and they've made a bunch of horror movies. So if you go to one of these elite business schools where one of these professors teaches, you might have an opportunity to take a class with them or do a research study with them, and you might be able to get on their good side, and then maybe they could make an introduction for you that might be useful. Obviously, you have to win them over first. So you can't just walk in and be like, "Hi, I'm a student here. Can you introduce me to Pharrell Williams?" Like, doesn't work that way. But that having been said, the better professors do tend to get hired by big companies to either consult to them or to be on their board. So Frances Fry, who is a pretty famous operations professor at HBS, was recently she spent some time at Uber recently. So, like, if that's a company you're interested in, you know, getting to know her if you go to HBS could be a pretty good thing. But I wouldn't base your admissions decision or your attendance decision just on the professor, just because the professors do move. Number one, they move from school to school. So, like the professor I mentioned a second ago, who's a friend of mine, a rock star at the MBA program he's currently at, but if this other school woos him away, guess what? Like, it would suck if you apply to that school just to study just with him and then it doesn't work out for you. So I would advise you in terms of professors, look more at like buckets of professors. So if you're interested in, say, finance or marketing or whatever it is, don't just look for one or two rock star professors. Look for um, a school that has what I would call a wide bench. In other words, they've got lots of really solid players. So that way, if one or two of them, you know, go to another school, you're not stuck. Also, honestly, in some schools, especially like, there might be like really famous professors, like Nobel Prize type people. Honestly, it might be really hard to even meet those professors. Sometimes those professors don't really teach, or they might be on sabbatical, or maybe they're used to a bunch of MBA students kissing up to them, and so they're a lot more immune to it, and so they don't open their Rolodex. If I had to give advice, I know this isn't the topic right now, but I would say the best professors to meet are the ones that have been there for a long time, because they're likely to have the most in-depth Rolodex, but not necessarily the rock star professors that everyone is clamoring and elbowing other people out of the way to meet, because it'll be easier to meet those guys, and they are not as used to being harassed by current MBA students. Okay, so I think I've talked through the major reasons why going to a top MBA program makes sense. At the core, it's the other students that they let in. If I had to pick one thing, because those other students are going to challenge you more while you're in school, and then they're going to go off to become more accomplished alumni, and you will become a more accomplished alumnus or alumna, and then you're all going to help each other over the next X number of years of your lives. But it doesn't always make sense to necessarily get a super elite MBA. Primarily, a top MBA can be way more expensive. I don't just mean in terms of tuition, although that's clearly one of the reasons. So top schools are a lot less likely to give out scholarship money, and I agree with them on this, right? We saw the starting salaries on an earlier slide. A lot of these schools, you'll probably be making at least 130,000, 150,000, and that's like, I think, the base salary. That's not even counting like bonuses and stock. If you go to work for Amazon in particular, like, they will probably give you also quite a bit of Amazon stock that will vest over time, but still is going to be worth a lot of money. And so since most people going to business school are going to make a lot of money someday, or they have the potential to make a lot of money, whether or not they choose to follow that potential is up to them. But since they have the potential to make a lot of money, the business schools do not necessarily feel that they are as under so much pressure to give away a lot of scholarship money, right? You will probably be expected to take out some loans, in some cases some pretty significant loans. So if getting a quote unquote full ride or an almost entirely covered scholarship to a business school is something that is super duper, like, mega important to you, if you are like, there is no way, Maria, even if I get into Stanford, if I get into Booth, if I get into Columbia, it doesn't matter, I will not take out all loans to attend that school, then don't apply to that school. Or at least apply to it, but then apply to other schools too, because even if you get in, you might get a scholarship, you might get a full scholarship, but you also might not. So if getting a full ride is something that really matters to you, then please apply to the quote unquote lower ranked programs. Um, I would say there's no scientific cutoff here, but if your GMAT score is, let's say, 50 points or higher, above a school's average, and let's say they're in the top, I don't know, 15 to 30 in terms of the rankings overall. I think there's a pretty good chance that that school would be willing to give you some scholarship money because from their perspective, they are buying your higher Gmat score. So your higher Gmat score, if they can do that for several people, it helps elevate the overall average. Or if they maintain their current average, letting you in allows them to let in someone with a score that's 50 points lower, but who might have like a super cool story, right? So sometimes some of the lower ranked schools in particular are willing to throw out money to attract talent. Sometimes they buy Gmat scores. Sometimes they buy people that they're like, oh my gosh, this person is going to be so successful. And so I want them like 20 years from now when they're being interviewed by Forbes, I want it to say like, oh, such and such, Abhijit, whatever, it was, graduate of Goizeta, who is now the CEO of whatever. Like that's what they're thinking that far ahead. So they are more likely to give you a scholarship. And also, when I talk about how expensive it is for a top MBA, the application itself is more expensive. Not just in terms of like the fees to apply, which are more expensive, but the amount of time and effort that it takes to get into a good program. I mean, the essays for some of these schools are ridiculous. I think, Stanford in particular, I mean, my God, you could you could spend like months and months and months on Stanford's essays, and so like it's kind of sad because I do see some people spend months and months and months and they didn't have a chance to begin with, and it's got a 5% acceptance rate, and so there can also be sort of an emotional expense. Um, from getting rejected, right? So if you are someone who is like very sensitive to rejection, then maybe hedge your bets a little and spread out, apply to some top tier schools, but maybe apply to some other schools. This also matters a lot if you really, 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 really want to go to business school next year, then just realize that you're better off spreading things around and having a diversified portfolio of schools that you apply to, so to speak, as opposed to putting all of your eggs in one basket. It can be really hard to stay zen throughout this process because it's easy, again, because of human nature being what it is, it's easy to get sort of wrapped up into things and to start listening to the hype and being like, oh my God, like I thought I'd be happy going to, I don't know, Rochester. Rochester's a great program. It's STEM certified. I can get a 3-year working visa in the US. Awesome. Oh, but now that I'm on these message boards and now that I'm reading, like, oh, now I'm thinking about these other schools. And then all of a sudden a school that a year ago you would have been super excited to attend, if you get too much psychologically and emotionally invested in these stupid rankings, then like you still might get into that school, but now you're like womp womp and you're sad about it, but you shouldn't be sad. I always get a bit of a laugh every year, inevitably. I will work with people, or I will see a lot of people who will have under their interest section of their resume that they are very interested in something like Vipassana meditation. And I'm like, that is awesome. And then 6 months later, when they applied to 8 schools and got into 6 of them and did not get into their top 5 schools, got rejected from all of their top, let's say 5 or 6 schools, and only got into 2, only, I say this in quotes, only got into 2 schools, and they're like, they're so disappointed and they're so sad. I'm like, wait, what happened to Mr. Vipassana meditation? Like, hold on. I thought you were all like above, you were like the Zen. I know that Vipassana and Zen aren't the same thing, but you know what I mean? Like, I thought you were like so spiritually advanced and you wrote this whole essay about how spiritual you are. And now you're like, wow, I only quote unquote got into this one school. So, especially if you are applying to schools that are, statistically speaking, a low probability that you'll get into, just that's fine. Go for it. Do it. But just realize that, please just be ready for the realism of of perhaps one or several rejections. And realize that those rejections are not a take on you as a person. It's not that you are a bad person. It's that just other people were more competitive, and maybe those are people you don't want to be friends with anyway. I don't know. Um, Also, something else that I want you to think about is I want you to keep your eyes on the prize geographically. So, for example, if you want to live and settle in a specific region of the United States, let's say the Midwest, Texas, I don't know, Louisiana, wherever it is, if you know that there's a specific area of the US where you want to settle, there is a tremendous value to attending a school that is famous within that region, even if that school is not in the tippy top. Because first of all, the year or two that you spend living in that city is going to give you the opportunity to develop networks in that city, right? While you're going to school, there's nothing stopping you from joining, I don't know, the local chamber of commerce, or maybe there's like a local group of like, local tech entrepreneurs in the Austin area or what have you. And so you can start meeting people long before you need those contacts later on after you graduate. Also, because people tend to stay often close by to the schools that they attended, those people tend to stay in the local businesses. They tend to rise through the ranks. And so the decision makers, people in positions of power in a given city or a given region, may tend to over index from having attended a certain school. So again, going back to Los Angeles, which is where I live, if you know that you want to live in LA and that's where you want to live and that's where you want to spend the rest of your life, there is a lot to be said for going to either UCLA or USC. Not just because you're going to get to network with people and do class projects with companies that are based in the area, et cetera, but because a lot of people who ascend to position of power in the Los Angeles area went to either UCLA or USC. And they tend to be really school spirited, and the Trojans hire other Trojans, and the Bruins hire other Bruins. And so there's something to be said for that. If your geographic goal, however, is to emigrate to a country that perhaps has a different standard of living than the country where you currently live, for example, if you want to move to the United States, yes, look, a STEM certified MBA program can absolutely help you get that 3-year OPT visa. And I am not a visa immigration expert, but anyway, the point is, if you go to a STEM designated graduate program, you are given 3 years versus 1 year of an opportunity to try to get that H-1B visa, et cetera. So it's better for you to try to get one of those STEM designated MBAs. However, first of all, like the Rochester MBA, which I mentioned before, the Rochester MBA is a STEM designated MBA. So if moving to the United States is something that really matters to you, look for those programs. There's a chance that, let's say you could have gotten into some other program. If you're very strong for a more highly ranked school, but you apply there, you might get a full ride there, and you might still get the same. I'm sure that Amazon also has to hire at Rochester. So in other words, like, if your main goal is to immigrate to the United States, maybe look at some programs that, as long as they have that 3-year OPT, that could help you get where you need to go. And by the way, it doesn't even have to be the MBA. There are a lot of master's degree programs, like, I don't know, masters in data analytics or masters in computer science or what have you, that will also give you that same work visa benefit. So think more broadly. The most immigrant friendly option in the world, as far as I know, is Canada. So if you really want to be in the Americas, I mean, Canada just makes it so much easier to immigrate there. It's also, as a side note, those schools are not as competitive to get into. They are usually a lot less expensive. They are sometimes only 1 year long, so you're also saving money. Like, the tuition on an annual basis is cheaper, but also it's only 1 year versus 2. Um, and then if you're interested in the European Union, I think the European Union is a little bit more tricky. The EU schools are more welcoming of older candidates versus, say, the US schools. However, you are going to want to do your research and reach out to people, because I have found that there are some schools where, if you don't have a lot of previous international experience, some of the schools won't like INSEAD will not even take you if you don't have a lot of international experience. Some other schools will let you in if you don't have a lot of international experience, but then their recruiters are not going to be as interested in you. So and this may be exacerbated if you do not speak a local language. So if you go to business school in Germany, but you don't speak German, or you go to business school in France and you don't speak French, like if you go to HEC, but you don't speak French, just realize that that's going to be a bit of a barrier for you going forward. Also, it might not make sense to do a top MBA if you are looking primarily for the education and what you'll learn. So those of you who have a family business or are successful entrepreneurs and you are trying to get the MBA to take the business to the next level, sure. Look, a top MBA could give you better contacts, which could make better clients, perhaps, maybe better investors later on. It depends a lot on what your business is, though, right? Because some businesses are ones that VCs would never invest in anyway. So there would be no point in you spending a lot of money to go to an MBA program where a lot of VCs graduate if then they're like, oh yeah, but we don't we don't invest in your type of business anyway. Um, but the basic education that you'll get from the MBA will be similar from school to school. And this last one, I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just being I'm just kind of an honest, I lay it out there kind of person. And so if you're not particularly ambitious, just, be honest with yourself and don't knock yourself out to try to get into a school that you may not get into, or if you do get into, if you're going to feel like a fish out of water surrounded by like 24/7 caffeinated go-getters, like you might not have as good of an experience. Um And also I have a friend from business school, I actually have a couple of friends who, if they would have gone to any other program, they right now where they are in their careers, they would be seen as being like super successful. But since we went to Harvard Business School, the expectations are a lot higher. And so I have a friend whose career has not been incredibly successful. And so by comparison, they might, and I'm using this word in quotes, they look like a quote unquote loser compared to other people because they've had a really hard time keeping jobs and doing well in jobs. And so it's like a weird psychological thing, but realize that if you get into one of these schools, that there will be an expectation on you to work harder and to be smarter than the average bear, right? So if you go to Harvard Business School and a company hires you and you don't perform to that level of rigor and whatever it is that employer is going to have higher expectations of you sometimes. And so if you know yourself and you're like, look, Maria, I know I'm pretty smart, but honestly, like I don't feel like chugging 15 Red Bulls a day and going all out, just realize that with that degree on your resume, there will be certain expectations. So I know it's like a weird psychological thing to bring up, but I don't know. I've got a couple friends that I think, I don't know, they might have been happier if they would have gone to other schools because they wouldn't feel all this kind of social pressure. And also their employers would not have these, what for them are unrealistic expectations. So, and then at the bottom here, I've got this little quote: only the smart kids got into Harvard, or only the smart kids applied to Harvard. So this is one thing I was talking about with someone many years ago, and I was talking to this person, and I was like, this person was like, Harvard, 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 got to go to Harvard, got to go to Harvard, and it was clear to me that based on their professional background, that they were not competitive, right? They were going to retake the GMAT and retake the GMAT, and I'm like, look, even if you got like a 780 on the GMAT, you're not getting into Harvard because their professional stuff was fine. It was fine, but it just wasn't at that level for Harvard. And so the thing I said to them once, because they were from the United States, I said, look, um, when you were in high school, when you were a senior in high school, did you apply to Harvard then? And he laughed at me and he was like, no, Maria, only the smart kids applied to Harvard. And I thought that was a really telling moment, because I said to him, and I did this gently. I was like, look, man, I think you're great. I think you're awesome. If I could ever hire you, I would love to have you on my team. That having been said, all those smart kids who applied to Harvard from your high school, guess where they are now? They are also applying to Harvard Business. Like, those people don't disappear. They don't just vanish into a void. Like, they're still out there. So, just if this is easier, obviously, if you're from the US, but if in high school you were like, man, I am just I know, only like the kids who took the AP classes and the kids who were the valedictorians and the National Honor Society and the president of this and if only those kids applied to a place like Berkeley or whatever, then maybe that could also guide you. I'm not saying that you should limit yourself, of course not, but just that could be a good like gut check litmus test. Another litmus test that's a little bit more recent is also looking within your own company. So if you work, especially for a company that tends to send a lot of people to MBA programs, Google, JP Morgan, Deloitte, whatever it is, look around and see who are those other kids, just like you probably did this in high school, right? When you looked around and you saw what are the other kids going to college, do that now for business school, but look around at your employer, at your place of employment, and say, okay, where are the kids who are, or the kids, the applicants who are getting into the top brand name business schools within my own company? Are they working in my division? So are they working in, let's say I'm at Deloitte and I'm in the strategy consulting division of Deloitte. I probably have a better chance of getting into a brand name school versus if I'm in, like, say, the implementation documentation, like implementing new documentation for new CRM systems or something like that, right? So two candidates might work for Deloitte, but once you dig into that resume, you're like, oh, well, this person is working on like stuff that's like way up here and super cool, and this other person is working on stuff that's still super cool, but just maybe not quite as cool. And so that's going to be your litmus test now, is looking across professions, people in your profession, and saying like, okay, where do I stack up compared to them? So that could be a good kind of gut check starting place. I call this the resume twin, right? Try to find someone whose resume 3 years ago when they were applying to business school looked an awful lot like your resume looks today. That can be one of your first gut checks, because honestly, admissions officers pattern match, and they know that, well, okay, when we let in this person from this division of this company, they do get a good job upon graduating. Then it just makes it that much easier. It's not a requirement, of course, but it means that there's less cognitive friction. It's just a more well-trodden path. If people like you have done that path before, then it's just going to be that much easier um, for you to make that same proof to them. So that is all that I have. Um, I think I think now I'm just me. What time is it? I don't know how much time I have left. Um, but if I do have time left, I mean, I got nowhere else to go. So if anyone had, let me see if there are comments. All right. So here's what I'm going to do. I see a bunch of comments. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go through the comments. Anyone who has a very, very specific question that is only specific to them, I will probably not answer because I don't want to waste everyone else's time. But if you have a general question that I feel may be of interest to lots of people, I will answer it. What the hell is wrong with the ads on the website? I don't know what that means. I don't have ads on my website. I don't want to be part of any club that wants me as a member. Okay, Gazal Garg is asking, you subscribed to Applicant Lab 2 months back. Absolutely love it. Yeah, thanks. Since my husband got into the media industry post MBA, I wanted to ask, what are some of the more creative roles that someone can apply for post MBA to leverage one's creativity, like at a place like Disney, Netflix, or Amazon Prime? So, Gazal, this is a great question, because I need to be honest. Both my husband and I, we did work in the entertainment industry prior to business school. We both worked in the strategy, corporate M&A divisions. So the most, like, about as businessy as you can get. That was us. He was in the movie industry. I was in the television industry. That having been said, that's not necessarily a requirement. It was much more of a requirement like 20 years ago. The entertainment companies have broadened. They've become more open-minded in the past couple of decades. That having been said, if you have an MBA and you want to work at a place like Disney, Netflix, or Amazon Prime, you will not get a creative job. You are going to be in data analytics, you're going to be in finance, you're going to be in strategy. If you want to be on a creative production side, you actually want to help make movies and things like that. This is where you're just, honestly, you're going to have to do research. You're just going to have to reach out to people who have like pre-MBA roles that look like yours. Spending a couple years as a production assistant or going to work at CAA. There are some people who can get more on the creative side, but then in order to do that, you literally start in the mailroom at Creative Artists Agency. you make minimum wage plus one is what it used to be at least. So minimum wage plus $1 per hour. So back when I was looking at this 20 years ago, we were talking like $8 an hour. But you do it with the hopes of becoming selected for their agent program, and then you take things from there. But in terms of people that I know who have had slightly more creative jobs, the one that comes to my mind is someone we know who she actually used to work for my husband, and then he wrote her recommendation and she went to business school. And so she was working at a job in content acquisition for one of the companies you mentioned. And in that case, she was using her analytical background to try to predict which content their viewers would want to see. So in terms of purchasing the content, or how much should we offer for this show, things like that, that's about as creative as she could get. But if you want to be like a filmmaker, I think that you probably, I don't think an MBA is going to get you there. You'll be on the sidelines for sure. Although the Amazon stock is worth a lot of money. If only there was someone attending this video chat right now who could comment on Amazon stock. Which schools have strong food tech placements? Well, Michael, I'm not sure. This is where you're going to have to just dig in. Honestly, this is going to be advice that I give everyone. Just reach out to the different organizations. Like some schools do actually have agriculture/food tech clubs. If a school has that club, that's a pretty good sign. If they don't have that club, okay, then maybe reach out to the tech club and see, is anyone interested in food tech. But off the top of my head, I know HBS has some people who are really interested in food tech, MIT, and some that are sort of less off the beaten path are going to be the ag schools in the Midwest that have really strong agriculture programs. So like a Purdue, for example, because they are so focused on agriculture at the broader university level, they're much more likely to have contacts at agriculture companies, et cetera. And those companies are based usually in the Midwest of the US anyway, so that helps. You also might want to look at like the Purdues and the Iowa states and the Kansas states, et cetera. Do I think fully funding MBA with loans is a reasonable option if you don't have any savings? That's exactly what I did, Mohammed, and I think it was worth it. I would not do it if I were going to one of these degree mills places, like, I don't know, Hult. Are they still around? HULT? Like, that's one of those places that, like, that's why, again, like, you're like, oh, I wish I didn't have to do so much work to apply. But this work that you do up front is just going to save you so much pain later. If you research now and you reach out to like alums from certain programs, especially if it seems like it's kind of a degree mill, and by that I mean like, as long as you pay us, we'll let you in. That sounds great, but then you see where the graduates are, and oh, none of them got hired by US companies, or oh, they're all in a lot of debt and they can't pay it back. But for the most part, for the top MBA, I absolutely think it's worth it to take out the loans. Or you could invest your money in gold. Okay, I love how Gmat Club is helping me out in the comments, because I don't look at the comments while I'm talking. It may be a challenge to find a high-paying job after graduation. Yes, that's true. If you go to like a top 50, a school that's say somewhere between 30 and 50, it will be harder to find a top-paying job out of graduation. Though I will say, again, the person makes the school. So, for example, let's say a McKinsey may not, as a rule, interview a lot of people. I'll tell you, I was recently working with a 2+2 candidate, these are the deferred candidates who are seniors in college who are applying to get into Harvard Business School now, but they will go a few years from now. And I was doing a mock interview for someone who was at one of the MBB consulting firms, but they did not attend a Harvard, Yale, Princeton, MIT, whatever. They attended a school that is absolutely not a feeder school. And so I was like, wow, does this firm even usually recruit at your campus? And they said no. And they were like, here's what I had to do to get that interview. I had to hustle like crazy, but I finally got the interview. And once I got that interview, I was ready. And so this person still managed to get a very good job. This is again at the undergraduate level, but I think the same applies for MBA as well. They got an amazing job in the strategy group at an MBB employer from a non-target school because this person by themselves is an impressive person. And the fact that they happen to attend a not so impressive college in this case didn't hold them back. So if you are, now that having been said, I think that this person probably could have gotten into a better college. But so that's why the consulting firms and stuff are open to interviewing people from all kinds of backgrounds. Is Maria focused only on US schools? Well, most people coming to places like Gmat Club are primarily interested in US schools, also European and Canadian. If you are interested in, like, say, IIM, then I am not a help to you because they're weird. They like ask you like physics questions in your interview. What does that have to do with anything? In my opinion. Even after COVID, someone was asking the question something. Even after COVID, but I don't know the beginning of that question. Top 20 alums pay it back comfortably? I would say so. I mean, obviously, if you go to a top 20 school, you take out a loan, and then you choose to go into nonprofit, you might not pay it back comfortably. But anyone who wants to pay back the loan can do so comfortably because they will hustle and get that higher paying job. Salaries have been insane in COVID after tech. I know at least one 2020 grad who borrowed 100%. I wonder who that is. Why do colleges need international experience even when COVID occurred? The expectations need to be lower, no? Well, Randarth Escobar, I would say not necessarily. I mean, you might not physically be overseas, but you might, I mean, Zoom certainly didn't prevent people from continuing to have international clients, continuing to work with international teams, continuing to do business overseas. So maybe physically you weren't going to those different countries, but just being able to show that you have that international perspective and you can work with people from other countries, countries that may have different values, different cultures, etc. Being able to demonstrate that is a skill that many business schools want to see, especially schools like IMD and INSEAD. I mean, INSEAD is the international, you have to speak like 3 languages to graduate from INSEAD. And I think one of them has to be English, and I think one has to be a European language, although that might be different or I might be wrong. But anyway, so like for an INSEAD where they explicitly say you must have international experience, they've let people in who may not have lived overseas, but everyone who gets in has at least had like clients overseas, or I have a boss, like my boss is in New York, even though I'm in Bangalore, and my clients are in Zurich. So that is that sort of a situation. Chase Jones, my dad and I don't have top MBAs, and we have the biggest core service agency in DC. You go, Chase. I love it. Rock on. Where did I just skipped down accidentally. Oh no, I was on Chase. I was so excited for Chase, and now I hit something. Okay, whew, here we go. Top 30 with some scholarships. Is it worth taking the risk, US or otherwise? How much would top 30 schools help in positioning a global career? I mean, at a certain point, Pranjal, it comes down to how much you're willing to invest in and bet on yourself. So if you look at that loan amount and you're going to say a school ranked 25th, first of all, again, I'm going to sound like a broken. I'm not saying this to try to be lazy with my advice giving. It's just that it's good advice. Reach out to other graduates. Let's say it's a top 25 school. You get some sort of a scholarship, but not a full scholarship. Try to find other people who are in the post MBA job you want, who went to that school, and just be honest with them and be like, hey, I only got a $20,000 scholarship. What do you think I should do? Right? I couldn't help but notice that all of you are back in India. Does that mean that you weren't able to get jobs in the US? Or even if you can't talk to them, like just look to see, like, you know, I see this with some of the European programs, sadly. People from India who get into a European program and then they are unable to get a job in Europe. And then so 2 years later, a year later, whatever, they are unfortunately back in India. The good news is they didn't pay as much for their degree, but just reach out to people. The LinkedIn profiles don't lie. Okay. Shovik says, go to the best school you can go to. 95% of my class are well on their way to repay their loans. Yeah, I think even though I went to a media startup after business school, because, well, this is in part because I'm also a very frugal person. So I'm a super cheapskate. But I was able to pay back my loans, I think, in 5 or 6 years. But a lot of people are able to do it in 3. Vivian's saying, what's the best way to avoid burnout during the application process? I love this. Take it step by step. Step by step, step by step. Not to toot the applicant lab horn, toot, toot, but I break things down into it's a lot of steps because you're going to have to do a lot of steps no matter what, but I break it down into lots of steps. So if you just do like 20 minutes a day here and there, it'll be behind you. Just like with the Gmat prep, right? Do a little bit every day instead of trying to do an hour at a, 5 hours at once. Okay, I feel like I skipped. Anushka is asking, what are the top things to look out for in the, I guess you mean the INSEAD MBA application? You just have to convey, Anushka, that you are able to thrive and win over and get people from other cultures to love you, to love working with you, that you've had those clients, that you've had those bosses, that you've had those teammates, and that they respect you as a leader. Because that's when the employers come to INSEAD, employers go to INSEAD specifically looking for people with international talent. So it's not just that INSEAD's being mean because they are French and they are snobby. That might be part of it, but it's mostly that they are so branded as the international school that when someone comes to recruit at their school, the recruiters are assuming that they're going to find talent that knows that they could throw that person into any office anywhere in the world. And the hope would be that that person would thrive no matter what culture you put them in. At least that's the goal. And so by showing that you really understand and can work with and can win people over from different cultures, that's a lot of it. Okay, here's an answer. Sovik answered this question. Given a career in finance, does a CFA help in getting a short list from top B schools? The CFA doesn't hurt, but also if you have a CFA, sometimes certain jobs in investing don't even need the MBA. So there may be an element of like, well, why is this person even applying to my MBA program? Because if they want to work in something like asset management, you kind of need the CFA. You kind of need the CFA might be just as good enough. I see some questions that I'm like, I just only see half of the question, so I'm going to skip this one. Hey, Maria, how do we balance writing essays that don't sound like we're pandering, but also make it clear that we've identified things? So honestly, I think, Michael, I think reaching out to students and being able to cite those students. I don't want you to reach out to 20 students. I want you to reach out to 3. And then being able to mention those students in the essays. Harvard doesn't care about students you've talked to. Stanford and Wharton, they won't hurt you, but they're not going to be like, oh, he reached out to a student. But pretty much every other school loves to see that you've spoken to someone. And so that way, instead of saying like, and by the way, it's that, because that way you can say like, I spoke to Maria who said that the entertainment marketing class was amazing. But also, like, trust me, if you make that argument a solid one, and if you really make it clear that you've done your homework and you say like, wow, I've looked several business schools, unlike other business schools that have general marketing, Kellogg has a product marketing track that is unique amongst the top business schools. And here are the classes I wanted to, and here's exactly why it makes sense for me. Like the way how I suggest linking it to your long-term goals is to actually come up with a hypothetical example in the future of where you will use what that class teaches. So don't just say, I want to take the brand management class to learn how to manage brands, like blah. But if you say, as someone who wants to start an agriculture technology company, I want to start an organic fertilizer company, I'm going to need to know how to create a strong B2B brand so that the farmers or the agriculture supply companies that will buy my stuff are going to understand, right? So in that way, it's like, that's why the class in business to business branding will be particularly beneficial for me. So if you make it specific class, and then a specific use case as to why it makes sense for you to take that class, that's a lot of it too. I'm going to try to, someone's asking, would Would changing jobs now be a risky thing at this point? Yes, changing jobs right before you apply can be risky for a couple of reasons. First of all, um, you obviously can't get a recommendation from your current employer because you can't tell them that you're applying to business school or they'll be like, "What?" Uh, and even if you could get a recommendation from them, what's it gonna say? It's I mean, like, I've known her for 3 weeks and she seems great. I don't know, but I don't really know her. Um, and then the other thing is, and this is one, especially if you're going to change jobs right before the round two deadline, one of my personal pet peeves, having been on the, my husband and I both having been like on the hiring side, is that it would it would be a really uncool thing to do if you change jobs, say in January, while you're also applying to business school, or say you change jobs in December, you apply in January, and then it's like, well, wait a minute, if you get into business school you're only gonna be there for 7 months and then you're gonna quit, like, this poor employer, like, they just hired you expecting you to probably stay for at least a couple of years. They're gonna put all this money and effort and time into training you, and then you're gonna ditch them to come to business school, like, there's something about that that for me does not sit well. Now that having been said, if the job you're thinking of taking is like a dream job that helps make position you like way closer to that goal, then take it anyway because you might not get into business school anyway, and so you might as well follow the career path that you would have followed if the MBA weren't a reality. But if we're just talking about sort of a lateral shift, you might want to wait a little. So it's like I'm wearing a G-Shock watch. It's not a G-Shock actually. It is a less expensive version, but I'm traveling and I am clumsy. And so I have on a very powerful watch that can withstand me dropping it. It's starting an MBA at 30, graduating at 32, too late. It depends what you mean by too late. Is it too late? Is it too late to get accepted from some programs? Maybe. Is it too late to get a job in certain types of jobs? I mean, it only you can answer that question, because for some people, it is definitely way too late, and for some people, it's a perfectly fine thing to do. A lot of it depends honestly, your chronological age does not matter as much as your number of years of work experience. So, for example, I've worked with people who apply to business schools at age 31, 32, but they got a PhD first, and so they only have 4 years of work experience even though they're 32, and so, like, so it is more about the number of years of work experience, but the tricky thing about applying to an MBA program is if you have, let's say, 10 years or more professional experience, the tricky thing is that you're either too senior to benefit from the MBA, and they're like, "Well, why would you go to an MBA program and then get a job that's like several levels below where you are right now?" Or if you're like, "But I'm not senior yet," then the question becomes one of, well, what's wrong with them, right? Like they're already a SVP, they don't need the MBA. Oh, but I'm not. I'm only a manager. Well, wait a minute, what's wrong with them? That they've been working for 10 years and yet they're only at the manager level. Like something's gone wrong. So that's the weird gray area that older candidates tend to find themselves in. Although, as Shovik points out, a lot of classmates were in the range of 28 to 32. Shovik, I'd be interested to know though, is that chronological age? I'm 100% with you. But are these people who had, say, 12 years of pre-MBA work experience? Um, I think that that is a lot less common because I think even if they get in, I just think that they should really think about what they're going to get from the program, especially if they're already in business. Um, that bump up is not going to be as dramatic of a but if they're like from a family business or if they're getting the MBA to run their own business or there's a lot of cases where it makes sense, but it can sometimes be a hard like no man's land of like you're either too qualified, which is bad, or you're not qualified enough, which is also bad. Um, Someone wants to know my GMAT score. It was 99th percentile. Um, I'm I needed a high score because I didn't have the best GPA. Someone's asking, I have a 10, so I knew I had to crush it. I have 10 years experience in IT consulting. Will an MBA benefit me? Sanjeev, you need to reach out to other people. What do you want to do? Will an MBA benefit you? I don't know. Do you want to stay at PwC? If you do, maybe you don't need the MBA. If you want to change to something else, maybe you do. It all depends on what you want to do. You need to reach out to other people who are in your division at PwC who have gotten MBAs, who have not gotten MBAs, and say, huh, what's the difference between them? A lot of people don't need it. Or maybe you could benefit from a graduate degree, but it doesn't have to be the MBA, for example. I don't know how much time. Okay. Oh, Christy wrote to me and said I have about 8 minutes left, but she wrote that like 20 minutes ago. I'm sorry. You guys know me. I could just keep going. I am happy to also stop. Let's wrap up. I agree. I'm sorry. I get carried away. I get carried away. We are going to wrap up as a result, but if you have follow-up questions, please check out applicantlab.com. I have a free trial that gives you a small smattering of what's available. And I also break down all of the top schools' essay questions into little pieces, and I beat them up and I tell you what to write. I also tell you what not to write. So, for example, I'll give you some free advice right now. Please do not write, I was such a curious child in your HBS essay. A lot of people want to talk about how they were such curious children, and every child is curious. That's how evolution works. I see that so much, but there's a hint. Don't talk about how you love to put together Legos or take apart the VCR, the DVR player when you were a kid. A lot of people love to do that. Okay, so anyway, I do lots of little do's and don'ts in Applicant Lab. So, but with that, everyone, have a great night, a great morning, and best of luck. Thanks to Gmat Club for having me as usual. Bye, everyone.